All right, part two of machines. Left off where we talked about simple machines, where we were able to talk about the inclined plane, the screw. The third type, basically, which is another inclined plane, is going to be a wedge. So all three of the first six simple machines are basically types of inclined planes. Basically, a wedge is an inclined plane back to back. They're used to split or hold objects. So an axe blade, knife, chisel, all those are type. Key down here is the thinner, just like we talked about with the screw, the more threads you have and the wider the pitch changes how easy it is to something to do. The thinner the wedge, the less force is needed to press it, but the less it's going to actually split something apart because it's thinner. And the reason it is easier to push is because it has lower or smaller surface area, meaning that it's going to have greater pressure. Notice the axe up here. Wouldn't be great to cut something and slide, but it's able to move more material, which you need to do with if you're splitting wood. And that's why you have a heavier top on it. So you're able to use some gravity to push it down and then be able to split apart large pieces of wood. Where you have knives, obviously they're not as big, they're not as heavy, but they're able to cut finer material. Really, in how your book has it, has inclined planes and then levers as being a second one. But most books are going to have six simple machines. So if we get to the fourth one, lever, kind of its own category. Basically, a solid bar that's going to rotate about a fixed point. And that fixed point is called a fulcrum. And actually brings us to a wheel and axle, because if you spin that solid bar all the way around the fulcrum, basically you make a wheel and axle. So levers and wheel and axles kind of go together. What this allows you to do is multiply your force again, but at the price of distance. So there's a couple different ways you can set up levers, and we'll look at each one. You have a first class lever where the fulcrum is between the effort arm and the resistance arm. And then you have a type 2 or a second class lever where the fulcrum's at the end in between the effort arm and the resistance arm. And then you could also have a third class lever where, again, you have the fulcrum at the end, but this time I'm going to have the effort in between the resistance and the fulcrum. So if we look at kind of each one separately, first class lever is what we normally think of: a seesaw, pliers, crowbars that are going to open things. Those are all first class lever. And the fulcrum is in between the load, which I call the resistance arm, I guess the distance of the resistance arm to the distance of the effort arm. Second class lever is when it's at the end, but I'm going to have the resistance in between the fulcrum and the effort. This would be like a wheelbarrow, nutcrackers, bottle openers, any type that you're trying to lift, and the load is actually going to be in between. And then the third class lever, a little bit of formatting difference there, is when you have the fulcrum at the end, but now you have the effort in between the resistance and the lever. So it just switches the effort arm and the resistance arm. Basically, this is one type that doesn't usually work as much as a machine because it actually makes work harder. But you're able to do some things that you wouldn't be able to do, like prying nails out of a board. You're actually putting more effort in than the force you're getting out of it. Lifting anything with your bicep, why would you want to lift heavier things? To make bigger muscle. So you actually have a smaller mechanical advantage. And then, as we talked about before, wheel and axle being another type. Basically, wheel and axles, the axle itself is the fulcrum, and the bar would be moving around in a circle is the wheel. But obviously, using a wheel and axle makes things easier to do. Hence, a machine. The last type of simple machine is a pulley. Pulley is basically a rope pulled over a wheel and axle that allows it to move. And there are usually different segments that you would have in each one. How I have one segment, two segments, three segments as you move. And that changes the mechanical advantage in how much weight you're able to lift with a pulley.